Sad day on Rod Stew, as yesterday, Claude Lemieux, the one of the greatest NHL playoff performers, died at the age of 60 by his own hand. Make even Makes this even more bizarre is Monday, just 4 days ago, he was the torchbearer for the Montreal Canadiens before Game 3 in the Bell Center in their playoff series against Carolina. One of my favorite in my formative years, and one of the clutch players of all time in the postseason in any sport. Drafted in the second round in 1983, actually cut by Pat Burns at some point before he came up with the club at the end of the 86 season, which he didn't like. But his reputation, Claude Lemieux, is always his playoff performance. And before he made a name as an NHL legend in the playoffs, there was a little bit of foreshadowing because in '85 he was with the Canadian junior team and had 3 goals and 2 assists in 6 games, leading them to the gold medal uh, with the Canadian junior team in the tournament. So the seeds were a little bit sown there, but nobody ever thought he'd do what he did when he finally came up in the '85-'86 season. He only played 10 games in the regular season that year, but in the playoffs, he had 10 goals, 16 points, and famously scoring the overtime game winner against Hartford in the Adams Division semifinal in overtime in Game 7 on Mike Liut. And then in the final, bit Jim Poplinski's finger, which generated the quote from Jim saying, "I didn't know cannibalism was legal in the league." But that was the reputation. That was the first taste of two sides of Claude Lemieux that were married together in the playoffs. One an absolute clutch performer, and one an incredible agitator who would do anything, stick, hits, late from behind, uh, anything to get an edge because the guy was just an absolute winner. And he winds up staying until the 1990s, traded to New Jersey. The Marty Brodeur teams they started, and uh, they lose in heartbreaking fashion in '94 to the Rangers. In '95, in the strike season, he comes back, and he gets to the postseason. Right, they finally, he only has 6 goals in 45 games in the regular season. He gets to the postseason, goes on one of the epic tears of all time: 13 goals, 3 assists. They win the Stanley Cup. They sweep the favorite Red Wings, and Claude Lemieux is your Conn Smythe Trophy winner, and well deserved. Claude Lemieux, like the everyman, getting the Conn Smythe Trophy, not the superstar, goes to Avalanche the next year and wins the Stanley Cup, but in the process ignites one of the most violent, bloody rivalries the league has ever seen since the beginning with the Detroit Red Wings, as the Red Wings and the Avalanche were the class of the Western Conference and the league. And in Game 6 of the conference final, he hit Chris Draper from behind, and you can't mention Claude Lemieux without that. Hit him from behind and just absolutely caved in the side of Chris Draper's face, as we all know. Broken jaw, broken orbital bone, broken cheekbone. His jaw was wired shut for many weeks. And Lemieux kind of shook it off in the press, and that really pissed Detroit off. So the next time when they met, the following March, I believe, Fight Night at the Joe, they called it. There was just fights all over the place. And Darren McCarty for the Red Wings got Lemieux back. He knocked him out with one punch, and everyone says Claude Turtle. He didn't. He was out cold. He beat him senseless and threw his head against the boards. And and those two would fight again, I believe, the next year. And that was kind of the rivalry kind of simmered down after that. But for 2 seasons, it was just a bloodthirsty free for all between two top end talented teams that had points to prove and revenge and a championship to win. And it made for absolutely compelling hockey. And Lemieux was right in the middle of it. He gets traded back to New Jersey in 2000. This is the one time I met him. And I believe he was traded for Brian Ralston. So he comes back to New Jersey. And, mind you, at this point, he's got 3 Stanley Cups in his pocket and a Conn Smythe. And they came into town. And my job at the radio station at that point here in Buffalo was to get the visitors' sound, the Sabres' opponent. And it was great because unless Sabres were playing Toronto or Montreal or the Rangers, and I'm talking regular season, playoff, obviously different. Um, there wasn't a ton of media, so you could really pick and choose of the best players on the teams that came in. And you get the coach, and it'd be like some visit, some guys from Jersey and the local person, me. And I saw Claude Lemieux, and I'm like, I got to go talk to this guy. Now, keep in mind, I had no idea what he was like as a person. This is before now, before social media being everywhere, and these players being taken video of 24/7. So now, I mean, even if someone's putting on an act, you can kind of get a sense of an athlete of what they're like, um, because there's just such an expansive amount of footage of a person that you know the real person's going to come out at some point, whether it's small or they're completely honest. So at this point, I had no idea. I just knew he was a complete badass and he was incredibly clutch. So I went up to him and, he got a picture. This guy just went through the morning skate. He's out of the shower. He wants to get on the bus, go back to the hotel and take a nap. And here I am. He has no idea who I am. I have no name. Um, but he graciously says, "Yeah, I'll talk to you." Okay. All right. That's a plus one. And I asked him, I said, other than the Jersey season and tonight's game and, the recent, I think 4 or 5 games before that, whatever, I think they lost they were like 1-3-1 coming into the game, I think. And I said, you have your playoff performances are like almost legendary. I mean, what about your game makes you such an effective playoff performer? And I didn't know what kind of answer I was going to get. I thought he'd be like, well, we try hard, typical athlete bullshit speak. But he gave me some really thoughtful, intelligent answers. And he said, when you play a team every month, it takes you to maybe the third period to kind of get a sense of what the matchup is and what the players the line you're supposed to shut down is about. Um, but you never really get a good firm grasp of it. He said when you play them every other night, you get used to their idiosyncrasies. He talked about hip placement, what hip they like to lead with when they skate, when they skated with the puck, which hand they preferred it on. And he says you pick up all these little things, and then you implement your game into it to disrupt it. He said not with me, but in his post career, he talked about Jacques Lemaire when the Devils would play the Bruins in the playoffs, and Jacques Lemaire would instruct him, "I don't want you on Neely right away when the puck's coming out of their zone. I want you 8 to 10 feet away from them, and then I want you to run at them." And that's exactly what he did. And I know he turtled a lot. That's not a great thing. He did take his beatings, and he did stand up for himself too at some points. 4 Stanley Cup championships, and when it really counted, he was one of the best. He is ninth in playoff goals since the league started, and the names are the all-time greats, Gretzky and Lemieux. Um, he's ninth with 80 goals in the playoffs. We're playing the Martians tomorrow for Battle of Supremacy for the Universe, and I have to pick a starting 18 out of any period in the NHL history, and it's a best of seven. You're damn sure Lemieux is starting on the wing for me in a best of seven against the Martians. But he had that kind of clutch gene, and the thing is that Claude Lemieux proves something that can't be ascertained by analytics. It can't be ascertained by extensive scouting. It can't be ascertained by uh, playoff perform. I'm sorry, uh, player performance metrics. Otherwise, you'd draft the greatest playoff performer every year. He had something that nobody saw and nobody could measure, and the great ones have it. And it's not hyperbole to say that I would put him in playoff performance, clutch company with Tom Brady, with Michael Jordan, with Derek Jeter. Those three had Hall of Fame careers. They're the five-star Hall of Famers of their sports. Uh, Claude isn't for his regular season, but for the playoffs, he is. You give me a Stanley Cup starting team against anybody, and I get to pick my team. And like I said, uh, Claude is on the wing. He had something that can't be measured, and to this day, it still can't be measured in players. This is why when the Sabres playoff round started, I was wondering against Boston, who's going to be who am I worried about? Who am I not? I wasn't worried about Zach Benson. Proved to be true. I wasn't worried about certain guy. Owen Power I was worried about. Turned out I was wrong towards the end of the Montreal series. But you can never measure that until that happens, until they perform in the playoffs. And he had that extra clutch gene. So I don't know, if he had CTE or he got a Robin Williams kind of diagnosis, devastating diagnosis that he didn't want to put his family through, untreated depression. I don't know. All I know is it's sad that at age 60, Claude Lemieux is gone. So rest in peace, Claude. You were one of the best when it counted.